and you look at my life, it's like, it's not like no bad things have happened in the time I've been going to temple. Lots of really bad things have happened, but my peace within it has been like untouched. Like that's why we're untouchable, right? It's like my ability to progress has not been touched.
Shima, I am so happy to have you here. Thank you so much for coming on today.
I'm so excited. I've been so excited and I can't believe it's taken this long. So I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you.
Yes.
So first, I would love for you to just share a little bit about yourself for people who don't know you and are so lucky to get to know you today. Share a little bit about you.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. I immigrated to America from the age of 7. Came to the US speaking zero English. So like yes and no were confusing to me at the time. I went to second grade. And I think I have a second grader now. I mean, don't you have,
yeah,
I think you have a third
second grader too.
You have a second grader too. And it's like, I went into school. Can you imagine my teacher in year in education? And I didn't speak any English at all. And I would get yes and no confused. Like, can you imagine trying to teach a kid like that? So that was me. And then fast forward, my family ended up joining a church called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which ended up ultimately making our decision to stay here. We were going to go back after a year. But my mom, having converted from Islam to Christianity, was like, I'm not going back. They'll kill me. So we decided to then stay. And we were, miraculously granted an asylum because of her political activities in Iran. So we were able to stay in America. And then I grew up mostly in upstate New York is where I grew up. And then I grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ, as I'm mentioning. And through going through this program they used to call EFY, it was like a youth conference thing. I remember people there teaching about BYU. And I thought, I'd never been to Utah once in my life. And I thought, I want to go to BYU. And so that's how my sister ended up going first the year before me. And, my first time out there, all of our first time in Utah was dropping her off at BYU.
Wow.
And we were like, good luck. This looks great. And she loved it. And so she encouraged me to come. So I then came and loved it. And that was kind of started my journey of education. I went to BYU undergrad, majored in sociology, was pre-med. We were all supposed to be doctors, like no exceptions, And I remember calling my parents in college so I had been pre-med and then I would change to pre-dental because that seemed acceptable. So it was medical field is above all else in my culture and my being an Iranian immigrant. And so Iranians or people, some from South Asia and other people would understand as Asians. I think it's odd for America. It's like people are like, why? Why is that better? Because in Iran, in order to become a doctor, you have to score the highest on, say, the SAT exam. Everybody takes this exam. It's called the Concours after high school. And if you score the highest on it, you get to be a doctor. And so my parents coming to America, they're like, well, you don't have to be a genius to be a doctor. You just have to work really hard. And so for us, it was like, obviously you're going to be a doctor. And so I remember calling my parents. It was so depressing because I was still scared. Like I worked myself up the courage to call my parents during college. And you'd think I would have called them to be like, I'm pregnant, Mom. It wasn't that. It was like, Mom and Dad, like, I don't want to be a doctor. Like, I want to be a lawyer. And it was
the shame.
No, and you're laughing, but it's like there was silence. Like I actually think my dad fell off the bed or something. Like it was like so shameful. And I had to convince him, like, it's not because I'm lazy. Like I just think I'll do, and it was just so hard to do that. So anyway, I ended up going to law school against my parents' wishes, going to BYU Law. Then I did some cool things. I worked for a judge doing a clerkship on the Ninth Circuit. I worked at a big New York law firm for 3 years, Kirkland Ellis, which now has a division in Utah and Salt Lake. And I did a Fulbright for a couple of years, a Fulbright senior research fellowship doing criminal defense work in Malawi and some other what else I do? Some advocacy, trying to fight against the criminalization of HIV transmission. Like seemed like a good idea to criminalize HIV transmission, but ended up not being so because it would make people hide underground and not admit that they had HIV. Then they wouldn't get treatment and testing. And so it would be more harm to their babies that they would have or to the families that they could infect. And so anyway, did some cool stuff like that, some fair labor things. I know things I haven't talked to you about. I'm like, what have I not told Lizzy? It's not boring. And then I got a call while I was in Malawi that a BYU professor in criminal law had died. And I happened to be doing legal aid work and wasn't quite ready to go back into academia because I was like, I want to be a prosecutor too. I've done defense. I want to do both. And then I jumped at the opportunity because it was my dream to become a law professor. So I came to BYU initially for 3 years. Then I went to the University of Utah, taught law, was an associate dean there for 10 years, and then felt kind of called to come back to BYU. And so I've been back at BYU the last year and a half.
Amazing.
So yeah.
By all counts, you've had a really successful career, done some really interesting things, and also things that not many people have an opportunity to do, which is so cool. You and I have known each other not so long, but already really deep. We've talked about this. Like, it's so funny. I feel like every time we're together, I'm like, wait, you did that too? Wait, what? When did you fit that in? What, like, to help me understand how you did all these things. But I love that that's the backdrop to our conversation, because I think by the world's standards, you've done it all. Like, those are the top. If you go into the law field, and I don't think you mentioned you're the top of your class, which you wouldn't say, but I think you were, because I heard that at the BYU devotional, which I want to link because it was so good. And then the Fulbright, and on and on and on, working in the night circuit. Like, those just aren't opportunities many people have. What I think is fascinating, and why I wanted to bring you on today, though we could have talked about 100 things, was how you've navigated your career as a woman. And then also the principles that you used to come in and out of your career, and your feelings about faith and motherhood, and how that has colored what you did in your career. And it's unique. I get asked often, and I know you get asked even more because you're in an academic setting with people in the college years. Like, is motherhood worth it?
Yes. Oh, so many thoughts on this. So it is, you're right. I think the most common ask of me is, I have a college student. Can you talk to her? And it's always her. I mean, most of the time, I'd say 70% of the time, it's a woman. Can you speak to her about your career and your family? And I think a lot of people, like I was, when I was considering, what do I do? Do I be a doctor? Do I be a dentist? Do I be a lawyer? I wanted to think about my long-term goals, because I knew ultimately that I wanted to be a mother. And I knew that was going to be the most important thing I did. And I didn't mention of my bio, and it's like, how do I miss that? I knew, because I knew we were going to talk about it later, but I also have 5 kids, and they're the most incredible accomplishment, the most incredible legacy, the most incredible blessing in my life. And I would give up anything I've written. I have written 3 books, a textbook, and a book with Cambridge, and all this nonsense. I would give all of that up if I had to. If it was like, okay, you can have your books and your career and your status and your prestige, or you can have any one of your kids. And I would say, take it all right now. I will take any one of my kids. And it's like, I wouldn't even, it's almost like ridiculous to even put it in those terms, because they mean that much more to me. And I remember a colleague of mine, you'll know him, Akil Amar. He's an amazing scholar, and one of those just kind of the most reputable probably scholar in constitutional law. He's at Yale. He's so smart. And I remember him posing this question. He came to BYU and he said, my goal with this book I'm about to write, and he's written already one very successful, amazing book. He's like, I want this book to last 200 years. And all of us were thinking, it's like, yeah, because a lot of books have a shelf life of 20 years, 30 years. You're lucky if you get 50. And I was thinking, of course, I didn't say this, I didn't want to offend anyone, but in my mind, I'm like, well, the book that has had the greatest long-term legacy, you think of several, right? It's scripture, it's Bible, and the Book of Mormon, and all. I mean, these are lasting things. But then I thought even further, I thought, what is going to be my greatest legacy? Surely my bail book is not that. It's going to be my children. It's those kids. It's any one of those kids, because they live on even beyond any book. It's more than 200 years. It's thousands of years. And, you think about how much genealogy we think about, people are so interested today in looking at their family and where did I arise from? And, which king was I related to, and all of this. And it's like, well, that legacy, that will last forever. It lasts eternally, I believe. And so anyway, I just think about how important that is. But yes, as you asked me before, it's like so many students call and they're just like, what can I do? Can I be a lawyer and still be a good mom? And I think you can answer this too, because you're the same. We're both, lawyers, but it is important to think about. And I'm not, I'm grateful I did this at the time too, but what kind of career can I do, which allows me to have the amount of time I want to spend with my kids? And this is why I thought the professor route for me was ultimately what I wanted. But I think even as a lawyer, I, have a good friend in my ward, and she's a trust and estates lawyer. And they, kind of other people I've talked to, I had my 20-year law school reunion, and I talked to one of my classmates who also does the same thing. And I even asked her, like, how much do you make? And because they make a good amount of money, and she works, I think 20 hours a week, where her kids are in school, she's able to kind of work while they're in school and make a good amount of money to supplement their income. Sometimes some of the women, it ends up having to be the primary income depending on circumstances with husbands and things. So I just think it's such a great field to be, to go into law. And there's so many other fields like that where I think sometimes people in our generation, Lizzy, I think, and you were, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this because you made the same decision. It was a little less common in our generation, I think. Those of us in our 30s and 40s, like to go and get that advanced degree. But I think, and a lot of my friends now are kind of wishing they did, because I think at the time we didn't know that you can get an advanced degree but not work for a good long time, or you can work 5 hours a week just to keep your foot in the door, 1 day a week type thing, doing trusts for friends, or and I think nowadays women are kind of more aware. There's so many different options. You don't have to work full time or nothing. There's so much more flexibility now, and I think our generation fought for that, and so our kids, right, have this option where you could get your degree, while you're even having kids. You don't have to wait. And then kind of pick it up or drop it when you want. And I know you've done an episode on this as well, thinking about kind of your changes in career, different every 5 years, like you said in your other episode. It's such an important thing for kids to remember. And I think sometimes it seems very like this or that. I can be a career person or a mom, but you're obviously a mom first, when you have kids, but you can also do both. It's just the options are so much more available now.
It's so interesting. Growing up as well, I remember asking questions a lot like, what if I do have to work? Or what if I choose to work?
That's
and
right.
What would be a good way to navigate that? And I feel like the advice I was given the most is find something flexible.
Oh, I love it.
Which is really good. But in my mind, I was like, I didn't know that many careers for women that I have like seen a woman actually succeed in and be a mom.
Yep.
I knew a lot of nurses. That's kind of all I knew.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, a nurse could be really flexible because they could be at home during the day and then work all night.
That's right.
But then I get to college and I'm like, do I want to be in the home all day and work all night?
That seems like hard.
Actually, I don't know if that's what I want. But I think the one thing I was thinking about is only flexibility.
Yes.
But I think you bring up so many good points. Also remembering what's going to fill you.
Yes.
What will excite you? What are opportunities that if you are doing both, if you have the opportunity to be a mom and you're doing work outside the home as well, if it drains you and leaves you with nothing left, if you have no flexibility, like really being thoughtful and not just saying, well, what do I see other women around me do?
Yep.
Stop and say, what would be the coolest life I could have?
Yes. And I love that. And I love that you bring purpose and meaning and dreams. And this is something, as a person who grew up in America, I was influenced by. But if I can add in a little of my immigrant parents' mentality, which I do also have, which is also think about the pay scale for that job, right? And a lot of people don't think about that. But like when you think about, okay, if I am supporting myself, which, takes me a while to get married, or if my spouse is not able to provide enough to buy us a house or whatever it is, can I get a job that allows me to have the flexibility, but also pays enough that it's worth it? And I've had this conversation. I just had it with my nanny this last week. She's brilliant, Lizzy, brilliant, straight A's. I mean, such a brilliant student. And she was like, I'm just getting a little intimidated by medical school. I maybe want to be a PA, which a PA is a great job. But for her, as this has been her dream for years now, I've known her for 3 years. I'm like, let's think about that at least. Like, why do you want to not do medicine? And I talked her into, because she's just like, I want a quality of life and I want to have this time. And I was like, you can do that. And I pointed to my sister who works 1 or 2 days a week. She's a neuroradiologist, right? Followed the path that the Broadons were supposed to follow, which I didn't. But it's an amazing one because she makes a really good living for her family if she needed to. And her husband also is a doctor and does it too. But she loves it. She's on 2 tennis teams, Lizzy, if that tells you anything, right? She plays competitive tennis. She's an amazing mom. She's home all the time. And yet she works a small amount of time. So you can be strategic, especially for these smart women that I know that the smart ones are listening to your podcast because you're so smart. But it's like, that is the kind of thing you want to think about. And I didn't think about that. And I'm so grateful. My dad, when I'd come home and be like, I want to be this or that. And he said, well, how much does that job make? And I would look into it and I was like, oh, that seems like enough. And he's like, well, this is how much you'd need to have this house that we live in currently, right? Because they had just gone through it. We didn't have a house until I was in high school. We were in apartment buildings. So my parents, that struggle was really real for them to gain enough money to have it. So it was like, they showed us that. You know what I mean? I think sometimes it's funny because culturally, my parents were open book about finances and how much they made and how much I needed to make to have the life they did. Whereas I think in some American families, like, you don't know how, like my husband still doesn't know how much his parents made growing up. And I'm like, I know exactly how much my dad made. He talked to us about it and he showed us how much taxes went. And I remember once, this is great, on election day as we're talking, I remember I was like, Dad, this much money that you make goes to taxes. And I remember him, and I was like, that's a lot of money. Like, that's even unfair, as a kid. And he's like, no, like, I'm so grateful that I get to be in this country, to be able to make as much money as I do and be able to pay these taxes to help other people. And I was like, oh, wow, Dad, like that,
so good.
It's so good.
So good. And for women, I think sometimes we'll say, women with a faith background, especially, I'm just going to pray and ask the Lord what I should do, or I'm going to look to culture, or I'm going to look. And I think living with a life of intention is saying, I'm going to do all the research and diligence I can. And I'm going to go interview women. I'm going to take women to lunch, or I'm going to tune into podcasts. If I don't have access to some women, listen to podcasts they've been on, figure out how they did it. Do and create the best life you can. Then take it to God and say, what do you think? Is there a better idea? Is there something more?
Because inspiration does come through other people. And I have to say, Lizzy, like before I made this like bold decision I ended up applying to law school like in February of my senior year, which is not like usually you're planning it, you're taking an LSAT course.
That's when I did too.
2 weeks. You did too?
I did
oh my
too.
Gosh. Yeah, I was so late. I literally walked across the street to BYU. I was like, will you let me in? And I was blessed that they did. But I remember going across the street and I was very fortunate. And this is why like any student that wants to reach out and talk, I'm willing to do it, because I went over to Susan Griffiths. I don't know if you had her.
Yes.
She's one of my favorite people at BYU Law School. And I went over there and I noticed that she had done domestic violence law. And I thought, at the time, that sounded interesting and I wanted to do that. And I asked her, I was like, and I saw a picture of her kids. She had 5 kids. And I was like, Susan, like, you're a professor, you have 5 kids, you do domestic violence law. It's like, I want to be like you. How do I do it? And she says, you know what? I went to law school and told me your path. But then she's like, I work 16 hours a week, is what she said. And I was like, oh, and that's doable for anyone, right? Like you can have 5 kids, you can work 16 hours a week or less or more, depending on the circumstance. And it gave me hope of like, I can do it all, And I think Sister President Camille Johnson spoke at Women's Conference last year. And I don't know if you heard her, but that's one of the things she said is like, it's, you can do it all. And she's worked her entire time where she raised her boys, and because of different circumstances that kind of afflict all of us, but she was just an example. I mean, we have the president of our Relief Society who has worked all along. She's managed to do it, and she's a very well respected lawyer. Now she's obviously a very respected president of our Relief Society, but those things are possible for us in a way that I think when we were growing up, we were like, I don't know, can we do it? We're kind of forging a new path.
I remember sitting in kind of like it was a PR experience for the release of the book Women at the Pulpit. Was a book our church put out with all women speakers. And there was a Q&A after, and there was a bunch of women in the room, and one of them, a mutual friend, Corinne Stoker, asked the question that I feel like we should go to next is, okay, if women can do everything, because we really can, like we are highly capable and we are wise and smart. But you can't do everything at once.
That's right.
I can do anything, but if I do it all at the same time, there's burnout. My family will struggle. My marriage will struggle. My career will struggle. How do you decide what to do? And the advice that was given, like, has stuck with me for such a long time. On the panel, she said, wasn't that what Eve had to choose? Now, obviously, we have a little bit of different doctrine. If you're listening and you're not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ, sometimes Eve is seen in a negative light, as the choice that she made was extremely wrong and, I don't know, selfish, and brought the whole human race down. And then we had to come back from that. And we see it a little different, that it was a courageous choice.
That's right.
And she actually said, we live in this state of paradise by partaking of the fruit, whatever that meant literally or figuratively. I'm going to a state that's harder. I'm actually choosing something harder. And it means I'm learning by experience. I'm not in the presence of God. We're going to have to do tricky things. Flowers don't just grow everywhere we look. It's not rainbow and sunshines everywhere. It's the hard path, and we have to cultivate the seeds, and we have to use the water and plant and irrigate and whatever. And I've thought of that so much that is actually the legacy we have as women, that we need to be really clear about what we want. And the right time and place for those things we're going to go after. And it takes so much intention. And you need to ask the question, like you heard on the other podcast, every year or every 3 to 5 years, is this still the right place for me? Or is there a place that I could better serve mankind or my
Yes.
family or myself for a season if I need to heal from something or
Right.
whatever? You've recently taken a career shift.
Yeah.
Tell us about how you went from the University of Utah to what you're doing now and what brought you there.
Yes. And I'm so grateful that you brought that up, because it is like your podcast. I mean, one of the themes of it, which I love, is constantly evaluating your path and what you could do differently. And I think that process, and something that I know you do often, and your husband, both of you, and I love that. I think the first time we really got to know each other was at a Tony Robbins seminar. That's what shows, like, because we're intentional and we're forward thinking and we want to create a beautiful life for ourselves and our families, and do what is driving us, right? What God is telling us to do. And I remember it was in 2020 with COVID and all the craziness that happened in our lives. I started to pray at that time, God, how can I do more to build your kingdom? And I kept praying. And really it was one of those, like, sometimes you get immediate answers to prayers, and other times you just keep praying for things and just listening. And usually I'm very impatient, so it's not like me, but this one I just listened and I waited and I thought, what can I do? And slowly these little things started coming to me in my scholarship. So as in bail, which one of my expertises is looking at bail and trying to get more people released on bail, because it has good outcomes for their families and for their lives, and they're able to keep their homes and get away from crime. So there's lots of good things for that. But at 2020, that was when crime rates started going up during COVID, and the next two years, and then until it started dropping. But for a couple years, it was a really bad time for being in bail, because all of the progress I'd seen from my beginning of my career, where people started thinking about bail, and then for that 10 years, everybody was doing more to kind of stop people from being detained. There was bail reform all over the country, like 500 pending bills at one point, 200 passed bills, like such exciting times. But I think it was a huge lesson for me in my life, because I saw in 2020 everything getting peeled back. And in 2 years, like, so much of the progress I'd seen in this bail policy had gone down. And so it was like part of my thinking, my tutoring from the Lord of, like, okay, so all this policy work I've spent 10 years dedicating full time on, right, is failing. And I had a colleague who was his very prominent judge at the University of Utah, Paul Cassell, who wrote one piece that, I disagreed with, but, like, cordially, because we're still really close friends. But I remember, like, one piece that he wrote single-handedly undid basically all my research. Wow. And I was like, And so as I was praying, I was like, what is it, Lord? Like, what do you want me to do? Because I feel like I'm hitting my head against this bail wall, like, or the violent crime and all this criminal stuff. I was doing straight secular criminal law. And I remember reading a book from my colleague who's not religious as far as I can tell, but she really focused on communities. And she's Jocelyn Simonson she's at Brooklyn, I think maybe now at Columbia, but she wrote this book about the impact of community organizations on criminal justice. And she gave these examples in her book, throughout her book. And again, it wasn't a theme, but it was faith communities. So, like, a church, a pastor in Louisiana who got her congregation to show up in court, and they would sit next to people that were accused of crimes and just hold their hands or just sit right next to them in these yellow shirts from their church. And the judges watching these members of the church, all of a sudden now this individual, this defendant who was unnamed and really out in 2 or 3 minutes, had a friend with them or two. And the judge, it changed their reception of these people. And they actually were setting half the bail amounts, Lizzy, that they were in the other times when they didn't show up. So it affected those judges. And how did it affect those judges? It affected their hearts. So I started to see, like, that is the way to change. It's affecting people's hearts. It's changing them from within. Public policy can be changed at the whim of a legislature. But when you change someone's heart and get them to feel something different that they didn't feel, that's where lasting change comes. So I started looking into this. Okay, this faith, like, how do I study what these people are doing? In my friend's book, I looked in every footnote and tried to find these pastors. And I'm like, there's got to be more like this, more examples like this, where people of faith are doing things to help people get off crime and drugs. And I started seeing so many things. And so I wanted to dedicate a career to this. And long story short, that's how I ended up back at BYU. I was trying to do something at the University of Utah, but the Lord was like, no, come right back here. And that's why I'm at BYU at the Wheatley Institute, where, one of their 3 focuses, one is the family, one's the Constitution, and the other one's religion. And I'm looking specifically on how religion and different religious organizations help people that have real serious problems like drugs or crime, and how do they change? And I've seen so much cool stuff on that so far. It's amazing. Yeah.
You know that that's such a shared passion that we
Yes.
have. We went to the German Oberammergau play together to watch the life of Christ for a very full day. And we went and walked in the steps of Paul the Apostle with David Butler and the funnest group. And we share that passion in how we live our own lives. But I think we also share the passion of saying, it's so good for society. It's so good for communities. It's so good for families. It's not just, this has been impactful for me, but like, this could change the world.
That's right.
We're seeing it change the world. Any stories you could share that you've seen so far, or things that have been fun or interesting from your perspective at the Wheatley Institute?
Yeah, so many. I mean, I think the neatest thing is now that I've kind of, been more openly discussing these issues, like the number of people who have reached out, who have seen this transformation in their own children, in their own lives, like, and letters from inmates that I regularly get. But now the type of letter isn't just like, can you represent me, which I usually can't because I'm in active status in New York. But it's more like, your message is giving me hope, right? Like the way you see the way you're articulating the scriptures that we already know, it gives me hope that Jesus Christ will accept me, that he does accept me, that despite the worst decisions I've ever made, that I'm not worthless, that I'm still a loved child of God. And I, love this past year with my students. I think we all had an epiphany. I think it was for me as well as them, where I'm teaching about this one. I don't know if you did this hypothetical in law school, but we do this hypothetical about punishing a certain member of the class that ends up, basically the class is like shipwrecked on this desert island after they pass the bar. It's a hypothetical, obviously. And one of them kills another in cold blood, but because they're lawyers, they create a judge and a jury, and they have this trial because somebody kills another person. And they, the sentence is death, is what they decided in this island because they don't have a prison, and so like someone will die. And then miraculously they're saved from this. And so the two options that really kind of the class chooses is like, okay, well, let's leave them on the desert island to suffer, or we kill them right there and then we go back to, or we bring them back to be held accountable in courts of law back home. But those are the two options. And I remember for the first time ever, I had this BYU class this year, and I had two kids in my class, and they're brothers. So it was Nathan Rich and Matthew Rich. And early on I was like, wait, you're both the Riches. Are you brothers? And they were, and they don't look alike. So I wouldn't have been able to tell. But I remember asking one of them, okay, Nathan, what if this was your brother that had this? And he's like, I wouldn't punish him. And then I asked, Matthew, what do you think? What would you do? And at first I thought he said, yeah, I'd punish him. And I was like, wait, what'd you say? He's like, no, I wouldn't punish him. I would not punish him. And, he was very adamant. And it occurred to me, like the Spirit brought to my mind was, didn't we all vow to be brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ? The Book of Mormon teaches that. Elder Suarez taught that at General Conference for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Like, aren't we, and a lot of Christians believe that we're brothers and sisters in Christ. Like, people will sign emails, your sister in Christ or brother in Christ. Like, what does that mean? If not to say that if you don't want to punish your brother in class, like, what about your other brothers and sisters that are also part of this class? And so I just think like that kind of thinking, even to me, Lizzy, is like foreign, because I've always compartmentalized, just like all of us do. Well, there's crime and there's just people that harm people. And then there's love and brotherhood and sisterhood, and that's the church. But there's got to be ways to think through that in our society, right? And that doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable for crimes, or we allow people that harm children to be with our children. Like, there are limits, and we need to punish people that until they're repentant. But we are the most punitive and carceral system in the entire world. So could we do better as a Christian nation? I think we could.
And for me, the crux of that whole conversation, and even of faith, is Jesus Christ takes us, and when we see our brothers and sisters as other,
yes,
and brings us as their same.
That's right.
Shima's same, different background. Yep. We've done different things. We have different gifts and talents, but like, I see you as same.
Right.
You are sister. Yes. And every time we can have an experience, whether it's through storytelling or through a company who's working on that, or a family service opportunity where we can take someone who in our minds was other.
That's right.
And say, no, they're same actually.
Right.
They're having the same human experience, just with different backgrounds and different things. Right. I think that's where we see miracles happen on earth today, and where you talked about the real change that's happening, that's going to go much further than policy in a book that's written.
Yes.
It's when something happens in the heart to see my neighbor is same.
Yeah.
And it's like my sister living next door. When she hurts, I hurt.
Yes. I love that.
And if she's going to jail, what would I do if my sister were in there?
Right.
And this, I think women have a unique voice. Men have this too, but I do think women have a unique voice in the workplace to see more sameness.
Yes.
And bring that heart into it. I think it's really interesting that when you gave your bio at first, you gave it all about your career.
Yeah.
And I don't slight you for that. I know how obsessed you are with your kids and your husband. And but I think traditionally it's been really difficult to say, I can bring human heart into work. And when I'm coming onto a podcast as I've done these things in my career, can I even talk about motherhood?
Yes.
Can I talk about that?
I love that you brought that up, because that's something I've struggled with as well. I think, especially, and this is like outing my own biases, but I remember in law school, like being more biased against my female professors. Like I acknowledge this. Like I remember early on at BYU, I heard this lecture of like, all of us have to be careful of our racial biases that we come into, or our gender biases. And I recognized it, though I didn't overcome it. Do you know what I'm saying? So like I saw that, like for instance, like if a female professor I had, made a mistake in class, which guess what? Every professor makes a mistake throughout a course of a semester. At some point, they'll misstate something or whatever. It's not a big deal, but I remember being harder on my female professors than my male ones. And I actually, if my students feel this way, like I don't blame them, because I had that same bias. And I think, and I remember even, in my job at Kirkland Ellis or other jobs, like trying to kind of not hide the fact that I had kids, but not bring it up as often, because I was so worried other people would be more sexist against me because of my having kids. And I even remember like when I would introduce myself for my beginning of the semester, like I didn't mention that I had like my kids or their ages or any of that. And it wasn't that I was ashamed of it. I was just afraid that they would think I was less smart. Like I'm not worthy to teach them because I have these kids. And as I've evolved, obviously, on this, and I hope, I imagine your listeners are more evolved and didn't have this bias I did. I don't know why I had that bias, because like my mom was a very smart woman. She stayed at home with us, and I didn't look down on her at all in any way for that. And she encouraged us to work, but I guess I didn't have, I don't know why that is. And as we were talking about this podcast, is the first time I realized like how it's just kind of like it's my own sexism that I had against women who have children. It's like, what? And I think it's important to bring this up right now, because I think so many of the young girls I talk to, the 20-year-olds, the 25-year-olds, that are trying to decide, it's almost like, well, I either am going to be like a capable woman with a career, a boss babe, or as they call it, or I'm going to be like a mom. And it's like, but you can be both, right? And I almost wish if I could go back, I would have said every year to my students, like how many kids I had, and that's changed, right? It's been gone from 1 to, I guess I started off with 2 and now I have 5, but just being more grateful for that, and being more, I don't know, not feeling like it's that or this is my kind of like, linear, or what is it? I forget the word for that, but it's like
binary thinking.
It's my binary thinking of like, it's either this or that. And it's not, it can be both.
And I think it's so helpful when bright women share their experience and talk about both together and say, and men too.
Yes.
I think if more men, when they were talking about who they are, said, and it's an honor to be a father, or what a gift it is that I'm also a father with this career. Like all of us who have chosen parenthood.
Oh yeah.
Could speak up a lot more, because if you had seen more women who got up, who were bright, say those things, it would have changed your perspective. And if we would hear this more, including the women who are bright and brilliant and wonderful, say, I chose not to work for 20 years. I wanted solely to be a mother and not work outside the home. I mean, like, if everybody who's made those choices could more articulately share that, this is what I've chosen and this is what I do,
right?
We would start to break the norm.
Yes. And none of that has to be apart from having kids. Like it doesn't have to be this or that. And I think one of the things that I don't know if this is what it is, Lizzy, but I just came to this, from a meeting at the Wheatley Institute where one of my colleagues was talking about some really depressing data on kind of people, on marriage and kids, and how both are basically declining. And one of the things he pointed out, which is so different than our time, was how many students that he teaches, the freshmen, sophomores, whatever, at BYU, whose parents incentivize them not to get married while they're in school. And especially the women. And this didn't happen in our day. And we joked about it. It's like, I'm here to get the MRS degree, it's like, and, I was very much against that as like oh no, like, but it's like those, and I did get married right after college, and so I just think, and And that's dangerous. It is, because I think it's almost like, why couldn't they get their MRS degree, even have a kid and still continue their education? Like, it's possible now with flexibility and with a humble spouse who's willing to work with you. Like, you can make things work now in a different way with family help, and lots of people have support. And so I feel like we need to think about that in our generation, because I think, again, like I was talking about, people in our generation as moms now have kids, and they look at their kids and they want them to have options in their future. And some of us, where it's like, well, I don't have those options, so I want you to have them, right? You're like living the future of your kids. But like, let's not deprive them of the most important thing they could do, which is get married and have children, right? Let's not like overcorrect the fact that some of us didn't finish our degrees at that time, which, you can always go back and get your degree. Not that, it's great to get it when you're young. It's easier, but it's not like something you can't remedy. We both have a close friend who's in her graduate degree now, and you can do it at any time. You really can, but it makes me nervous that, we're overcorrecting, and it's like, well, yes, you can get married. And a lot of young people are like, well, career first. And you get down this road. And my husband has a colleague at work who is now single and older, he's in his 40s, and he's just kind of like, now what? Right. And I think that's where it ends up for many of us, even those that have kids. Like, your career, it's even as fulfilling as it is, it's your career, but the relationships you can invest in, whether your kids, your nieces, nephews, others, like, those are what's going to be lasting. And I know you ask yourself every week, was it the funeral? Like, what do I want my legacy to be? And which is like, what are people going to say at my funeral? And it's not going to be, oh, she wrote all these books. It's going to be, she played baseball with me, or she did this funny thing when we were together. She took me on this trip. Like, your kids, right? That's going to be the greatest testament. And you think of at funerals with people have kids, who speaks, who dominates the discussion? It's the kids. It's their kids and what you did for those kids individually. And so I just hope we're not losing sight of that in our generation as moms.
What's so crazy is your comment about your books having shelf lives.
No, yeah.
If you write a book in your 30s, by the time you die, it might already be not helpful for anyone.
No.
It might be outdated.
That's right.
So even by the time you died, I'm not even talking next generation.
It's this generation. It's already lapsed its usefulness.
And I would love to say this to like college girls listening in within those 20, 25, even 20 to 30 year ages. If you don't know if motherhood is worth it, here's two women who believe it is.
Oh my goodness.
Who have opportunities and who have done things. Like, I truly can say there is nothing that brings me more joy. Nothing. I'm not paid to say this. No one told me to say this. I've lived it for the last 15 years as I've seen, man, I sure put a lot of work into this project. And it made a difference somewhat.
Yeah. And to show you like where I've come from, because some of them might not relate to us in our 40s and be like, okay, yeah, you could say that now. But when I was in my 20s, like, I didn't feel that way. Like, I knew I wanted to have kids, but I wasn't kind of like, I want to have as many kids as I can. I think as I've gotten older, I've started to realize like the important role of our posterity and how critical they are and how much more important that is than the other things I do. And I think when I first had my kid, I had my first child, I was 25. It was a few years before I planned on having kids. And like, I was a little bit annoyed, I have to say. I was just like, oh, like, this isn't my life plan. Like, I didn't. And of course, like, God gifted me this child to be like, no, this is. And of course, immediately I realized like how much more fun. I actually enjoyed being at home some. And I worked a couple days a week in my law firm. I was home the other days. And it was so fun to have both. And I was just like, oh, God knows me so well, because I wouldn't have lasted very long at a law firm, I have to say, working full time. Like, that's not my style. I'm more of a kind of, I don't know. I like to have a variety in my life. And so it was so much more fun. And so it ultimately ended up not just being a blessing in the long term of like how important it is to have my son. He's now just this intellectual, like, beautiful human. And I get to interact with him for the rest of his life. But also like it ended up being better for me in a career sense. It's like, do you want to work full time? Really? Have you done that for a while? Do you know what that's like? It's like, I don't know.
It's easy to glamorize that, especially if you haven't tried it.
You haven't tried it.
But again, bringing it back to like, that's the intentionality. Yeah. Go take some women to lunch.
That's right.
Go job shadow some, like do a day in the life of, figure out what are those things that will light you up and what you're good at and where you have unique gifts. And then some of it's also what opportunities come your way and really evaluate those things. Yeah. I would love to pivot now to faith.
Okay.
We've already talked about it some. Yes. And again, it's something we share so deeply. How has faith played a role in your life? And obviously, whether it's a relationship or faith or career work, it ebbs and flows and there's different things that come in and out of our lives. But talk a little bit about faith and how it's guided you.
Yeah. So I think of even as a child, right? I remember learning how to pray the prayers of Islam with my mom, where I would, wear a head cover and we would prostrate ourselves on the floor and sit up. And so I remember always having this reverence for God ever since I was a little kid. Like I loved the silence of prayer and how respectful she was of it, and then how respectful I learned to be of it. And as my mom's faith evolved and we, joined the Church of Jesus Christ and now introduced this Christian thinking into our family, I always just felt so close to that. So I've really always had this kind of spiritual side, this motivating part of me that was driven by faith and this desire to do what God wants for me. And I've felt, because of our family circumstances, right, very much like brought by his hand, first out of Iran, war-torn Iran. We were there's bombing. We're in our basements, like hiding our faces with towels because Saddam Hussein was bombing Iran at the time, to then miraculously being brought to America, where there's like all the food you could eat and beautiful beaches. We ended up in California at first, and it was like the most amazing thing. And we were just like, wow, what a blessing. So we definitely felt this kind of hand of the Lord. And my mom was very much driven by her faith. And so, and it's been interesting because as an adult, I've had to kind of come to my own faith. And that's been really cool. And I think, hopefully some of the young people are going through that themselves. I think at some point you all have to go through that, and you have to decide where your faith is. Because for me, even though we've been blessed by lots of miracles in our faith, in our family, everyone has chosen different faith paths as of now, right? Like a couple people are Muslim, somebody's agnostic, somebody's, doesn't know if he believes in God, another's New Age spiritual. And I'm, a Christian and member of the Church of Jesus Christ. And so I think at some point, regardless of what your parents do or your friends do, you have to decide what, within yourself, what's right. And I think I'm just grateful. I've kind of been praying all along. I think God has just kind of led me to the decisions that I've made. And I think I'm just so grateful for that. I think my faith has really been the thing that's kept me going in the dark times of my life, where I felt like, oh man, couldn't get worse, But then I knew I had God, and I felt even his voice stronger in those times. And I don't know if anyone's listening and is in one of those times where you just don't know how things will turn out, and you don't know if things will be okay. If you just trust in him, talk to him, and having that daily conversation, that kind of dialogue with him, as I do, I feel like I don't really like do proper prayers as much as I do. Like we start a discussion, and then we keep going. I listen, we come back. A lot of repentance in there, where I'm like, sorry about that thought. So I'm being judgmental, or I'm being prideful, and it's just checking in just like that. It makes it easier than the proper, like where I used to think, oh, I have to like pray for repentance. And it's like, I'm repenting now all the time.
So good. Any other faith practices you want to bring up or share that have been helpful to you that might be helpful to others?
Oh, yes. So for me, going to the temple has been my best tool for kind of forward planning, fighting my anxiety, having peace in my home and not contention, trying to bless my kids as they're getting older and making their own decisions. Like anyone with teen kids, like go to the temple, because you start to lose control as they get older, and you're supposed to. That's how kids develop. And you probably know more about this as you teach students, but it's like the more control you let go of, the more you realize like how little control we actually do have. And really it's all in God's hands anyway. And so it just has turned me more upward in prayer. And I go to the temple because I know it blesses my posterity. Like I'm promised that in the temple. And so the more I can go, the more I can have those blessings. And where I don't have control of what my kids do, I do have control of how much I can be in God's house, have the Spirit with me, and have those blessings come forth to them. And I believe in those blessings. I've seen it in my life where my kids have been blessed. I've seen it. I mean, so many examples, but one I'll tell you is my son, Kian. We were in Cabo, which we've been together there. It's one of my favorite places to go. And he was doing some surfing on this break, and it was fine for a while. There were some good waves, but he got pushed along to these rocks on this like really dangerous part of the shore. And as I'm like seeing, like I'm basically at this pool, like a good distance away, and me and these three other moms are watching him, and it's like basically he gets pushed over on the surfboard, but then he's clobbered and the waves keep coming and he can't get on. It's like, it looks like he's just rumbling in these rocks, like, and really being pushed. Like, I think he's got to have like a head injury. Like there's no way he's okay. And so I'm running like so scared. And I see him come out and he's scratched all over. I mean, completely like sea urchins. And I mean, totally like looks like a battle wound victim, bloody chest, but he's okay. And like somehow miraculously, like the rocks he didn't get a head injury. Like everyone was shocked. Honestly, we were all just like, how did he survive that? And I do believe that like when we go to the temple, like our children will be protected. And not to say like harm doesn't come on people, but I felt that at that time. And I think you'll feel when those moments happen. I've felt it myself personally, like driving at different times where like it's come to me clear, like that was protection because of your temple work. And the more we focus on other people, and we know that, right, as well, in the happiness equation of life, it's like the more we can focus on other people and serving, and that's what you're doing at the temple. You're not thinking about yourself. You're thinking about people that have gone before you, giving them options for their own salvation, not yours, but theirs. And the more you think about other people's salvations, it's like Jesus Christ did. Like the more we turn to him, the more we glorify him and not ourselves.
So good. I think there's really practical things we can do in faith practices that really work.
Yes.
They're really helpful.
Really
and I think
help.
it's kind of something like motherhood where it's like, is that really worth it?
Yeah.
Does that really help?
Yes.
And I would just invite you, if you're listening, like, go find out for yourself.
Totally.
Don't lean on what friends are saying or family saying or your culture has said. Like, do the work to find the answers for yourself. And something I love, being the same faith as you and also going to the LDS temples. You go in and you all dress the same in white. You put on a white dress and it's simple.
Yep.
And then you put your phone away.
Yes.
And as the world has gotten noisier and busier and you always have talking heads in your pocket at all times.
Always.
That has been a huge
blessing. Or
blessing
just even
for me
having
too.
it there. It's like reminding you, is that email coming through?
Yes.
Or did I get a like on Instagram? Or did somebody send me a message that I need to respond to? Right? It's like just it being in your pocket. Whereas it's in the temple, it's locked away.
It's in a locker.
It's supposed to be turned off.
And I think there's so many parts of that practice that are helpful. And if you don't have a temple practice that you currently are doing, I think it's also helpful to say, when do I put my phone away? When do I put the noise of the world away?
Right.
Do I see others as same as me or others? Like, I think there's so many things that we could pick apart in that
I love it.
that are so beautiful, but it's a practice that's solidified me and like made me a little bit untouchable from what everybody else thinks and says. I go there and I'm kind of like, I don't care as much.
So true.
And we
I
need
think
that
of
as women.
times like, going to the temple regularly, like where, and you look at my life, it's like, it's not like no bad things have happened in the time I've been going to the temple. Lots of really bad things have happened, but my peace within it has been like untouched. Like that's why we're untouchable, right? It's like my peace and my forward thinking, like my ability to progress has not been touched. Although the circumstances and the stresses of life are still there. It's just, I've been untethered. I've been tethered to God and not been able to be swayed by the winds of the world in a way that's harmed me. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like from the outside, it seems horrible, but from the inside, it feels like you're calm. It's like a duck, right? The little duck.
Yes.
So it's like you can't see the like furious activity. All you see is the calmness. And that's how I felt. It's like maybe on the outside, it looks like, oh man, her life seems really hard right now. But I felt completely unfulfilled.
Yes. I would love, if you wouldn't mind sharing, Shima, a couple tips or best practices for women who are trying to make both work. Maybe they have to, maybe they've chosen to, maybe they feel called to. Just a couple best practices, like how do you find that peace outside of faith? Could include faith, but like, this is how I would do it. And this is what I would have done differently. You could share a pitfall or two if you want, but just a couple of things you would say there.
So I do have some with the career front. And I think, as I've people are just like, how do you do it all? I don't do it all. And I have a lot of help, and that's helped me a lot. So part of my calculus growing up, right, as I was like thinking about what job I want to do, I also even thought about that. I thought I need to have a job where I could do, I wanted to make my home like my mom did, and I'm not doing as good a job as she was because hers was every day a home cooked Persian meal that took 4 hours. But I do try to put dinner on my table and things like that. And so I had to think like, what are things that are important to me? And for me, like feeding my kids healthy food matters. But for me, like, organizing their closets, like making sure they have like the best clothes to wear, or, other things like cleaning or doing laundry in a certain way, like those things didn't matter to me. So I felt like, okay, if I can make enough money to hire some of those things out, that's something I always prioritize. So as I was thinking about law fields and, different things I could do. And I think that's important for your young listeners to think about. It's like, what things are important to you, then you keep those, right? And of course, for me, it's like the bonding time with my kids, trying to teach them. If I can show up to a field trip, even like one kid's field trip once a year, each of my kids, that's a win for me. So some people are spending a lot of time in the classroom, but again, like as a working mom, I don't get to do that, right? There's like, you say yes and no, and some things that have to be a no for me. And I'm grateful for the moms that are like, no, this is my passion. Like I want to be in the classroom, and they do so much good. And I'm so grateful for them, but you can't do it all. So if that's something important to you as a 20-year-old, like I want to be on every field trip, like don't be a lawyer and a mom. It's like, it's hard to do all of it, but I'm grateful for the things I've been able to do because I have help. So because I don't have time, I don't need to spend as much time on laundry or dishes or cleaning, I have help for that. Then I can do, like, I'm home in the afternoons. I can practice violin with my daughter. I can talk to my son about this. I can do homework help if I need to. Or and another thing I think too is like, I think people, sometimes we think like we're doing our kids favors when we say, make them hot breakfast every day or something like that. Like to me, a win is when I've taught my kids how to make a hot breakfast for themselves. That is a win, right? Or when they make a hot breakfast for me and the rest of the family. Like I think of my kids during COVID, and they both became really good cooks, my older sons. And like on Sunday, it's like, okay, Darian, like you're making steak because you make it better than mom now. And my kids are like, we want Darian steaks. I'm like, I know, I don't know how he does it, but he does it better than me. That's a win, right? Like I don't need the glory. Like my glory is my kids learning to do things themselves. And I think that's a thing that is like, it's good all around. It's like you think about the things that you enjoy doing as a mom, but maybe might be handicapping your kids in the future. Like we need to be careful about that, right? It's not about us, it's about them.
Yep.
And I think, what the more you can teach them, think about their spouses. Like I think about my boys and how capable they are in the kitchen. They do their own laundry, they clean their own rooms, right? Like they all know how to change diapers. They put up kids to bed, like all these skills they already have, where like they're going to be great spouses one day because I've taught them, because I haven't done everything. I haven't handicapped them by doing everything for them. Do you know what I mean?
I remember reading in Clayton Christensen's book, How You Measure Your Life. And he talks about outsourcing.
Yes.
And what is the outsourcing we're okay with as a family and what we're not okay with.
Right.
And there's going to be, it's going to look different in different homes.
Right.
But be intentional.
Yes.
If you're just kind of saying, well, they did this, so I should do that. That's not a good reason to do it. Just because Shima said, or just because Lizzy said. Yeah. But really say with your spouse or even as yourself, like what would be a beautiful life? Right. And what am I not willing to outsource with my kids? What am I willing to outsource? That's right. I love this. I hope those of you listening, as you're navigating this motherhood and career and faith, that you have people you can look towards to say like, I like the way they're doing it. And if not, also be intentional about that. Find the women that are doing it maybe in a way that speaks to you. Yeah. And again, find the podcast. Maybe they don't respond to your emails. Maybe they're not someone who has the time that you get to take to mentor and be there at BYU, but listen to the podcast they've done. Think about what are the conversations I could be a part of, or show up where they're speaking somewhere else. The thing that I do know is if you have a question and you have a prayer, God will open up a way. If there's something that you feel like you can't navigate on your own, ask God and wait and see the doors that open up both in your career and even in the questions. Like, how do I do this, God?
I love
that.
Make
this work.
And I think you're so right. Like so many women who have mentored me, I've never even met. Right. And I've just studied their words and I've studied what they've taught at different conferences and things like that. And so you don't need to meet these people to be able to be prayerful. And then of course, like the greatest lesson is everything that Jesus Christ said. And so studying that, I think that really puts my life in perspective of like, what am I doing? What am I trying to do? But then also, looking at people like me, like women that, and how has a faithful woman lived? And I think something we talked about, and I wanted to mention for if anyone, it's helpful to anyone, is like, I used to think of people as that I looked up to, like women mentors, like normally, like, you look at people that are famous or on Instagram or models or whatever, and like as my icons for beauty. And then I'd look at, kind of the successful women of the world as my icons for success. And as I get older and I hopefully more mature, it's like, I look at women who are leaders of faith. Like I think of like President Camille Johnson, President Emily Bell Freeman, President Porter, like in our church community of these women. And like, that's what I want to aspire towards, like a woman of faith, a woman who prioritizes, children and family and youth and humanitarian work. Right. And I think the reason I say that is because, in my age, in my 40s, mid 40s, and we've talked about this, like so many women are struggling because they used to be the prettiest woman in the room or thought they were, and their youth is leaving them. And so it's like, what's my identity now? Like do I just cling to my youth and to my beauty or my looks, the way I dress, or is it something else? And I think for me, like my focus in my next 40 years is like, how do I build my faith? That's exciting. That's a lot more exciting than trying to like keep the gray hairs that keep coming out of my head or the wrinkles that just show up. And I want to follow Arthur Brooks. It says like, look in the mirror as little as possible. Maybe just look to see if you have something in your teeth. That's about it. But like move on and then try to be a woman who like radiates light and goodness and faith rather than beauty. Cause like we all know, like when you try to hold on to your beauty, like it's just like it is what it is. It's a phase, but our faith and the growth that we can have of light, that can keep going. And that's an exciting goal for me in the next 40 years.
So beautiful, and brings us full circle that what are the things that last the longest? What are the things that matter most? What are the things that become a legacy to us? Those are worth spending our time on. Yeah. Let's round it out. First, I'm going to ask you, just where can people find you if they want to learn more about you? I would love to link a few of the podcasts you've been on because like you tell your story in full detail. I want to make sure people have access to that because it's so inspiring. And but we'll link the podcast. Where else can they find you?
Just on Instagram and TikTok. So I'm Shima Baughman on Instagram. TikTok is called Closer to Jesus Christ for the younger folks that might be on TikTok. And I try to share messages of faith, of Christ, and then things I do at the Wheatley Institute. So anything trying to build faith and the Constitution and family, those are really important things. As I'm studying more and more, I'm like, wow, these are really important, particularly the family. And I know we've talked about it a lot, but like there's so much. I mean, the unit that the God has created us to live in is families, and it's for a reason. And so to whatever we can do to strengthen families. So that even though that's not my expertise, I'm starting to realize like this is so important. So
yes. And then let's end with, what do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy. I think for me, I want it to be one of light. I want to bring more light to people. I want to radiate God's light that I feel to others so that they might also feel joy. And I've recently started doing this experiment. It's not something you should do in New York. We both spent some time in New York. Don't do it in New York because it can lead to bad things, but just smiling at people and like working really hard to smile at them and seeing if they'll smile back. And honestly, like 99% of the time, like if you smile long enough, like people will smile at you if you give them the genuine love that you feel in your heart. And that would be my legacy. Like, can I bring more light to people? Can I bring more kindness? Can I bring more faith? Because I know that will make other people happy as it's made me happy.
So good. You do that to me. You know that.
To me. I'm so grateful.
Thanks so much for spending time and for all the good you're doing, both mentoring and helping and modeling what it can look like and kind of pioneering that as a woman of faith in your own life. And then also the work you're doing at the Wheatley Institute. I just want to dig into all the topics there and hopefully we have more chances. But
I know.
Thank
it's so
you.
Fun. Thank you.
This is a treat.
Thank you so much.